So Dave, welcome. We're glad that you're here. Go ahead and unmute and let's kick this thing off. We'll get started. What just one quick question before we jump into your presentation, Dave. What was it when you had the opportunity to buy Ranching for Profit from Stan Parsons? What was it that made you and your wife say, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Thank you for the introduction, Jared, and I'll tell you that in a minute. But when did you first come to the school?
That was January of 2023. I don't
think
so.
it was 2023.
Oh no, sorry. Did I say 20?
Yeah.
2003.
2003. All right.
Yeah, so early.
I didn't think I just met you a year ago. So
No. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah. You mentioned something about it being cold in a lot of the country. I have no sympathy for people. I mean, you guys think it gets cold where you live. Sometimes we get frost. I mean, so give me a break. The thing that led me to buy RMC, when you're young and a little bit of a contrarian and maybe a little rebellious, you want to do the thing that people tell you not to do. Well, I was at UC Davis, and my professors talked about Alan Savory and Stan Parsons, these two heretics, they called them, snake oil salesmen, they said, from Africa. They were telling people about moving cows around in circles. And of course, if that's what they really had been telling people, they would have been crazy. But the professor said, don't listen to what these guys have to say. Well, of course, being a student, I wanted to hear what they had to say. And instead of, the problem with the universities, and I have a lot of respect for the universities. I feel my dad was a professor at UC Medical Center in San Francisco. And I feel like the University of California is my family. So, I can criticize my family. You criticize my family, and we're going to have words. But I can criticize my family. I have standing to do that. I feel like the university is my family. I took a position in the University of California in cooperative extension. Half was research and half was teaching. And one of the very first things I did was go hear Savory and Parsons talk. And by then, they had split up. Alan brought the grazing and the grazing and ecology part of the partnership. Stan Parsons brought the economics and the animal science part of the partnership, and neither one brought any people skills at all. So they had what they called a Rhodesian conversation, which is a four-step communicative process. It begins with a bold statement, followed by a flat denial with ensuing verbal abuse. Fourth step is physical violence. I think they went to stage 3.5 of a Rhodesian conversation and split their partnership. And Alan, who's better known, started the Center for Holistic Resource Management, or now Holistic Management. And now he's got the Savory Institute and some other things. Stan started Ranching for Profit. With Stan, it was clear to me, was not out to save the world. He just wanted to save your place. I don't know how to save the world. That'd be kind of a cool thing to do, but I don't know how to do that. But it sure is a lot of fun to help somebody get their place working better. So that's what Stan's focus was, and it was always appealing to me. And I started teaching with him in, I think, 1991 or 92. He had me start teaching in Australia because the further away you go from home, the more people will assume you know. And then I could come back here and teach. I was still with the university. I would take leave without pay to do these schools. Anyway, 14 years later, I'm still with the university. My career has stalled because I'm doing research on how to apply these concepts in California. It was very unpopular with the university. You've probably all heard the axiom, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Well, that catches up with you after a while. And so it wasn't so much that I wanted to run Ranch Management Consultants. I wanted to leave the university. And what am I going to do? And Stan wanted to go back home to Africa and asked me if I was interested in running the company. And so I remember my first reaction was, I'm not a businessman, I'm a teacher. And I turned it down. And a couple of weeks later, after permission to do some research I had been doing for 10 years with the university, they withdrew permission to continue. I called Stan back, and the rest is history, I guess. It didn't take long after starting to run RMC that a friend of mine was over And he could see the stress. It was just palpable. He asked us how it was going. And I said, well, at least I bought myself a job. And I realized at that point, RMC was not a business. It was just a collection of assets and a bunch of jobs. That's true of most farms and ranches. Most farms and ranches are not real businesses. They're just a big pile of very expensive assets and a whole bunch of low-paying, physically demanding jobs. And a business is something more than that. And I realized that if people expected help making that transformation in their businesses and their lives, I'd better darn well make the transition myself. And so Kathy and I rolled up our sleeves. And one of the things I like to tell people is you cannot run a sustainable business on unsustainable effort. It's always been interesting to me that we wear our work ethic like a badge of honor. You know, I see guys that with pride say, I haven't taken a vacation in 30 years. Meanwhile, their wife is beside them going, I know. Well, when they brag about never taking a vacation, to me, that's not a badge of honor. That's something to be embarrassed about. I think, is it that bad a business that it's so reliant on you that it would fail if you left? You don't own a business if that's the case. You own a job, or more accurately, the job owns you. So that's one thing we help people do, is make that transition. Now, there are two transitions that we make. One is in taking this collection of jobs and the pile of assets and transforming that into a business. That's one transition. The next transition is taking it from one generation to another. And that's what I want to begin with this morning. Well, that's what we're going to focus on this morning. I'm going to be meeting with you all again on Thursday, and we're going to take another big step in that transition. Give you that. Today, we're going to talk about some of the principles that I use to help people with transitions. When we wrap it up, I'm going to show you the technique we use to apply those principles. By the way, I love this quote. You don't get harmony when everyone sings the same note. You have to have disagreement. You have to have contrary opinions. The thing is, we don't know how to disagree agreeably, to respect one another's points of view. But I've never learned anything from somebody who already agreed with me. I learned from people who don't agree with me. And yet those are the people we tend not to want to be around. I'd like you to open your mind to the possibility that maybe we don't have to agree with people to learn from them. Of the people who want to pass their ranches on intact to the next generation, only about 30% are successful doing so. That's measured 10 years after the transition. And that term intact is important. I mean, some places more than that have survived, but they may have survived by selling off a piece or some other thing. Anyway, the whole place isn't intact. I think that's a disaster. And by the way, that statistic applies to non-ag businesses as well. Fewer than half the family businesses that survived to the second generation make it to the third. Why is this? Well, first of all, most people don't have a plan. The second thing is when they do have a plan, the plan focuses not on what they do want, but what they want to avoid. I don't want to pay taxes. I mean, how many workshops have people been to on succession and estate planning where the focus, well, here's the three things that I typically learn from those seminars. Actually, I don't necessarily learn this, but this is what I hear. One, it's really, really hard. Two, it's really, really important. And three, here's a strategy to help you avoid paying taxes. That's about all I get out of those workshops. Well, paying taxes is not what you want. That's what you don't want. I don't want to pay taxes. What do you want? And that's where I want to start with you. Then the plan was, if they do have a plan, it was created for a set of circumstances that don't exist anymore because everything's changed. And finally, the successors and heirs didn't know what was in the plan. Transparency is really, really important. And we're going to get into all that and a lot more as we go on. You've probably heard this phrase. Now, Jared, I'm also going to ask you a favor. When I've got about 15 minutes left, because I'm kind of the guy that drives down the road with the turn signal on for 30 miles. In Nevada, it would be more like 60 or 70 miles. And there's no place to turn. That would be me. My wife calls that an oblivion. So I tend to be an oblivion at times. Jared, I'm going to be an oblivion for the next, looks like I've got 50 minutes. I need you to warn me when I've got 15 minutes left. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay,
Can
thank
do.
you.
Can do. And if you guys have questions for the presenters, You can type them in the chat. We won't get to every question. The team and I will pick out the most relevant ones, and we will ask those questions. Certainly, if you need a clarification, I can interject, but we will leave maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the end if we can, Dave.
Okay. Then you better give me a warning at 20 minutes out.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So this phrase, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. It's not true. But we'll get to that in a moment. One of the things that makes ranch management consultants and the Ranching for Profit School different than other programs is we don't start with trying to get people to change what they do. We try to get them to change the way they see things. I remember having a really bad day in class, the very first school I did. It was in Australia. And Stan Parsons was sitting in the back of the room. And I think for him to watch me teach the school for the first time must have been like watching your baby daughter date a Hell's Angel. It had to be painful. And I had forgotten this very basic tool called a trading account. It's how you figure out the value an enterprise produces. And it's really simple, but it was just gone from my mind. And at the end of the day, he took me aside and said, Dave, do you even know what this school is for? And I came up with some kind of line that, well, it's to give people the tools to build sustainable businesses. I thought that was a pretty good explanation. He just shook his head and said, Dave, you still don't get it. This school has one purpose. And it's to change the way people see their ranches. And at the time I thought, come on, it has to be more than that. But I've come to learn that there's nothing more than that, because the way you see things, the paradigms are subconscious beliefs that we use when we have them. And the way you raise a family, we have them politically. Sometimes those aren't so subconscious. We have them in our religion. We have them in the way you raise livestock. We have them for all sorts of things. And they're useful because the paradigms lead to actions. They give us structure, a way of thinking about things. The actions give us the results we get. Stephen Covey used to talk about see, do, get. The paradigms are the way we see things. Our actions are the things we do, and the results are the things we get. If you want different results, you got to do things differently. But you will not do things differently until you see things differently. I'll give you an example of that. If I think the key to being successful in the cattle business is to wean big calves, well, what kind of things would I do? I'm going to have big cows. I'm going to calve early. I'm going to push the feed to them. And guess what the result I get is? I get a big calf. I also lose my shirt. Because if you always do what you've always done, you're not going to get what you always got. You will lose your shirt because the situation we're in isn't different. There was a time when weaning a big calf made sense, but that time was 50 years ago. It's not now. There are other keys to making a profit, but as long as I have the belief that that's what I've got to do, that will lead to my actions. Those will lead to my results. I will not get different results until I see things differently. So what this really ought to say is if you always think what you've always thought, you'll always do what you've always done. And you'll lose your shirt. So here's what I want to do today. I want to start with how do you see things? What are your paradigms specifically about estate planning and succession? Some of these have implications way beyond succession and estate planning. But the reason I want to start here is because the results we're getting, if only 30% of the people who want their ranch to survive intact to the next generation, if only 30% of those folks are able to do it, I think that's a terrible result. We aren't getting the results. So that means we're not taking the actions we need to get those results. And to me, that means we aren't thinking in a way that supports effective actions. So in order to take better actions, let's start with what we believe. I'm going to share with you today what I believe about estate planning and succession, principles that work for me. You're unlikely to share all of these. And I'm not saying that the way I look at it is right. It's just the way I look at it. What I'm hoping this results in is for you to evaluate the way you look at things and to go through, as I'm going through these things I'm going to talk about, to think, do I agree with that? Do I disagree with that? How do I see that? And let that generate a discussion with your spouse and with your kids and with your parents, so you can determine the actions you need to take to get the results you need to get. because 30% of farms and ranches surviving to the next generation intact is not an acceptable result. That's a crisis by anyone's measure. Can you see that your paradigm, the starting with paradigms it's so fundamental. It's essential. Look at this. If your paradigm is that our family legacy is a set of principles and values, not a physical asset, I don't need to pass on this physical asset to honor our legacy. That belief would lead to one set of actions. Do you think this would lead to the same set of actions? This ranch is our family legacy. I need to pass it on. If you see a physical asset as your legacy, your actions will be very different than if you see a set of principles and values as the legacy, not a physical asset. Another example, to be fair, we should leave equal shares of our assets to our heirs. That paradigm would lead to a much different outcome than equal distribution of assets would not be fair to my kids, to the kids who made sacrifices to help us. If that's my paradigm, I will take a completely different set of actions than the first paradigm. Two more examples. From the potential heir, I'm entitled to an inheritance. If that's my paradigm, my actions and attitudes would be a whole lot different than if my paradigm is inheritance is a gift. My parents don't owe me a thing. I would be much more open to whatever planning happens and whatever results achieved, and it's going to the relationship I have with my family after the transition is going to be way different if I hold that second paradigm. One more. These could be very difficult discussions, and life will be easier now if we put this discussion off for a while, versus we need to let our successors and heir knows our plans early on with complete transparency. That's going to lead to two completely different sets of actions. So I want to start today. At one time, I wrote a paper called Dave's 25 Succession and Estate Planning Paradigms, but I think the number's up to 28 now. So I'm losing count of all my paradigms. I'm going to walk you through quickly what they are. And here's the first one. I believe that family is too important to mix business and family. Business is business and family is family. I had a tremendous advantage over most of you. And this isn't to brag, it's just the way it was. Our office, Ranch Management Consultants, was 1.5 miles from my home. And every morning I would walk to work. And when I was at work, I was at work. And I'd walk home at the end of the day. And when I was home, I was home. Now I have a home office too. I'm sitting in it right now. When I'm in it, the door is closed and I'm at work. When I'm not in here, the door is closed and I'm home. I have physical boundaries between my work and my life. Now here's the problem with y'all, or most of you. Let me tell you what your problem is. Well, one of the problems you have is this. When you're at work, where are you? For most of you, you're home. And when you're home, where are you? You're still at work. And when there's no separation between what you do and who you are, what you do becomes who you are. And when that's the case, we are susceptible to all sorts of things. But maybe the worst part of it is if what you do is who you are, then who are you when you stop doing? And if what you do is who you are, how do you ever retire? This is why most ranches skip a generation. I think we need physical boundaries between our life and our business. I think we need financial boundaries between our life and our business. Your business ought to be paying you a paycheck, and you ought to be putting that in your personal account and living your life out of your personal account. Things like that. The second one is, I don't believe parents owe their adult children an inheritance or a job. My mom explained to me from a very early age, probably an inappropriately early age, she explained to my sister and me that we would not get an inheritance. Here's a little dirt on my family. My mom's mom came to live with us when I was very young. She had Alzheimer's. And my mom blames that for driving my dad out of the house. He abandoned us pretty much when I was 6 years old. And so I was raised by my mom, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up. We never felt poor, but her money, she started a small business, scrimped and saved. I'll tell you, if anybody could pinch a penny in this world, it was my mom. because money was important so that she would never become financially reliant on my sister or me. She was obsessed with that she never wanted to live with us as adults. She didn't want to have the impact on our lives when we were grown that her mother had on her life. And so she was obsessed with that. So the message my sister and I got, this isn't exactly the way my mom put it, but the message I got from that is my mom loves me too much to give me an inheritance. She loves me so much that she's never going to be financially dependent on my sister and me. She's obsessed with that. And I've taken that attitude to my own kids. I intend to leave my kids an inheritance, but my kids don't feel it. I've talked to them. They don't. I get the impression sincerely from them that they don't feel entitled to an inheritance, and I don't feel obligated to give them one. I see inheritance as a gift. Nobody's entitled to a gift. I don't believe kids owe their parents their future. Let them pursue their own dreams. When I started teaching the Ranching for Profit school in Australia, a certain proportion of the class at the end of the school or within a year or two after the school would get completely out of agriculture. These were young people, 25, 35, who decided that they were pursuing their parents' dream, not their own. I saw that as a success. If you're going to be on the farm, you should be there because you want to be there. I believe that the roles of ownership, management, and family are distinct. And we start to get into trouble when we mix those things up. Are we talking now as owners? Are we talking as the management? Or are we talking as a family right now? This is one of the reasons I think we need boundaries about where we have the business discussions. I don't think it's appropriate to have business discussions after hours. You know, if there's a crisis going on, then that's one thing. But I think, well, I'll share another short story with you. My wife was a teacher, and she would volunteer at the California Academies of Science Museum, leading school groups and things like that. And I was with the university, and we have stereotypic Californians. We have some redwood trees in the back, and we'd have a glass of wine watching the sunset under the redwood trees, and she would share her day with me, and I would share my day with her. When we started working together, we'd get to the end of the day, and we'd still sit down and have a glass of wine under the redwood trees, and she would say, well, let me tell you about, well, wait, you already know about my day. And I would say, well, let me tell you about my day. Well, you already know about my day. And it was hard to figure out what to talk about. I don't think it's necessarily a natural thing for husbands and wives to be in business together. Now, of course, I was raised in a different culture. I was raised by a single mom back in the 60s and early 70s. And there was definitely strong feelings about divorced women back in those days. But I don't believe in my paradigm as a husband is not supposed to be the boss of his wife. And I don't think the wife is supposed to be the boss of the husband. It's supposed to be a team. Which leads me to another thing. I remember a Native American gentleman who came to the school, and he introduced me to his Anglo wife. And he said, yeah, her English name is Three Horses. And I said, really? 3 horses? And he says, yeah, nag, nag, nag. That's not the way that accountability is supposed to work in a family business. Anyway, I believe the roles of ownership, management, and family are distinct. I also feel like being part of a family business does not entitle someone to own, manage, or work in the family business. They ought to only be working there if they're competent. Family businesses ought to only hire family if they're qualified to do the work. Otherwise, it's just an employment program for otherwise unemployable people. We ought to be bringing our kids back because they're the most competent people to do the job. And I believe that bringing adult kids into the business isn't good for the kids, it's not good for the parents, and it's definitely not good for the business. By the way, I'm a little reluctant to do this because I just counted them up, and there's something like 210 people here live on this thing. If you would like to work through this list and really check it off, how do I feel about this particular thing? How do I feel about that? And have the discussion with your family. How do you guys feel about this thing or that thing? I have this list in PDF form. And if you want to shoot me an email, and my email is plastered at the bottom of the screen. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll send you the list with one understanding. One is that you will not distribute it outside your family. You won't give it to somebody else. You won't teach from it. You won't do anything but use it for your own situation. If you would like that, then shoot me an email and I will respond by sending you a PDF of this list. I believe it's healthy to separate your life from your business physically and financially. That's similar to something we already talked about. It's important to separate the operating business from the land investment. Really, this is fundamental. If let's say there's 3 kids and the ranch is worth, or the farm is worth $9 million. And I leave it in an undivided interest to the kids. In other words, Jared, his third can't be distinguished from my third, and Kathy's third or Selena's third can't be distinguished from that. They're all commingled, right? So it's not like Jared can carve out his third and sell that. It has to be sold as a whole. The ranch is worth $9 million. What's Jared's third worth? It's not worth $3 million. Who's going to buy 1/3 interest in a family business, a minority interest in a family business at market value? Nobody's going to do that. I would say Jared's interest might be worth 40 cents on the dollar, maybe something like that. This gets into a whole bunch of things, but I think separating the operating business from the land investment, you can have multiple owners of the land as long as there is a viable buyout agreement that ought to be set up by the first generation. It ought not be something the siblings have to work out with one another. The terms for siblings buying one another out should be established from the previous generation. But the operating business, 1 person, 2 at the most. It gets to be a complete mess when you have 5 brothers and sisters trying to manage the operating business. It's fine to have multiple owners of the land, the operating business 1 or at most 2 owners. This isn't something I believe, this is something I know. Tax avoidance is the 3rd leading cause of succession failure. Tax avoidance is not managing for what you want, it's managing for what you don't want. We ought to start by managing for what we want. I also believe that dividing land is a crime against agriculture. I think people ought to be strung up by their little toe and tickled to death with a feather for splitting ranches. It's so hard. This is the single biggest challenge to making a place profitable these days, is the fragmentation of land. And some places are worse than others, but there isn't a place that I'm aware of in North America where this isn't a challenge now. And it's because our parents screwed it up. Our parents weren't willing to make the tough decision that you're going to be called on to make to keep the place intact. I believe that the most powerful and enduring legacies may not involve any physical assets. My mom was wrong. She did leave us a small inheritance. She left my sister enough to pay off her farm. She left me about $200,000 in stocks and a small rental property. My sister got about, if you just look at the absolute value of what my sister got, it was probably about double what I got. It wasn't equal. But about 5 years before my mom died, we built a house on her farm, on my sister's farm, for my mom to live. And my sister was there every day for 3 years until my mom had to go into an assisted living facility. We had a nurse that would check on her every day, but my mom, she had Alzheimer's. She was right that just like her mom, she got Alzheimer's too. And every day the nurse would come, she didn't know who the nurse was, and she was scared that, who is this strange person? And she would go out in the pasture and start wandering down the road. And that was just unacceptable. And we couldn't have an armed guard 24/7, 365 on my mom. So my mom was wrong about leaving us something physical, but my mom's legacy had nothing to do with anything physical. It had to do with a set of principles and values. And in my mind's eye, that's much more powerful than any physical asset could ever be. My mom was not equal in what she left my sister and me. but I think it was exceedingly fair. In fact, if anybody got the better end of the deal, it was me, even though my sister got more money, because my sister had more. My sister's only 15 miles from me, and I would go up there at least once, usually twice a week, and visit my mom. But my sister was there every single day, and had to deal more with her wandering about and the stress of that than I ever did. It was appropriate that my sister got more. So I don't think equal is most of the time, I don't think equal is fair. And besides, equal is really hard to do. I believe that every family business needs a family employment policy. You know what the key to getting everybody on the same page in a family business is? It's having a page. You can't be on the same page unless you write things down so you can make sure that you agree. You know, Jared and I can have a conversation and we can say, yeah, I think that's a great idea. But a week from now, he's going to have spun that a little bit and I'll spin it a little bit, and we won't be in perfect alignment. And we'll probably wind up doing that. If we write it down, this is what we agreed to. There's no question about it. I think on that page, there's 7 things that we need. One is we need certain policies, and one is a family employment policy. We need to define our purpose. What is our mission? Why are we in business? What is customer value? What is owner value? We need a picture, a vision of what the future holds and what we want to do. We need a plan to achieve that picture. We need positions. We need to define positions and roles in the business. We need procedures to make sure that we consistently produce results towards those, not for every single thing we do, but for a lot of things. And things that we're not pleased with the results we're getting, it would help to define what is the process that we use, what would be a better process. And the final thing we need is a pathway, the succession pathway to get there. And those things all need to be written down. The family employment policy would include a set of, it would start with an explanation of the purpose of having a policy. What are we trying to accomplish here? Probably something like effective working relationships and loving family relationships. It would have a statement of philosophy. Here's how we go about doing that. Business is business and family is family. And when you're in business, I'm not your dad, I'm your boss. You're not my son, you're my employee. You're not my spouse, you're the vice president, you're the CFO. What is our philosophy? Then it would have to do with how things are laid out in what are the conditions under which we employ family members? What are the qualifications that they must bring to the table? The next thing would be compensation. Do we rely on sweat equity, or do we actually pay a wage? And if we do use sweat equity, which actually there is no such thing, sweat equity is something we should refer to as deferred wages, and we should quantify what that really is. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the final thing is, how do opportunities get created, or do they get created? Does somebody have to leave in order for there to be an opening, or do I create an opening just because my kid is ready to come back? Those things need to be spelled out, and that's what a family employment policy does. The estate plan needs to support the succession plan. Now, the succession plan, let's be clear on this, that's deciding who's going to run what, whereas the estate plan decides who's going to own what. I've seen pretty good succession plans to get completely undermined by the estate plan. That I want you to run this, I want you to run this, but I leave ownership in such a way that it makes that nearly impossible. So they need to be in sync with one another. And unfortunately, they need to be reviewed every once in a while because things change. One of the things we talk about at the school is the cost of employing one labor unit on a ranch these days, or a farm. The cost of employing a $40,000 labor unit is about $100,000 to the business. Once you look at housing, vehicle, payroll taxes, workers' comp, and all the other costs associated with that position. Unless your ranch is just a jobs program for family members, that family member needs to contribute more than just what it costs to employ them. The standard rule of thumb we use is an employee ought to generate 3 to 4 times their cost of the business in terms of value for the company. Now, I had a terrific gal working for us, Robin, who she didn't create any income. She liberated me so I could produce income. So this is measured as the team. The gross product of the team, the value produced by the team should include, say it costs $100,000 to employ somebody, the value the team produces should rise by about $300,000 to employ one labor unit, and that includes family members. Relying on sweat equity is asking for trouble. This is a little self-serving of me, but I want to push you to the Ranching for Profit YouTube channel. And I thought one of the best ways to do that is to play an example of a typical video that's on that channel. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of lessons like these. This one I want to play for you right now involves sweat equity.
Counting on sweat equity? That's a really bad idea. Look, if you're going to count on sweat equity, then you'd better actually count it. Literally, how many hours, for how many years, at what rate of pay, with what rate of interest. You better document the value of your sweat while you're still sweating. Doing it after the fact is going to lead to an ugly fight. And let's not call it sweat equity. Let's call it what it really is, deferred wages. Now, why is it so important to document the value of your sweat? Well, most people have an inflated idea of what their sweat is worth. I remember facilitating a family meeting several years ago between mom, dad, and their son to help work through some succession and estate planning issues. Mom and dad were 60-somethings. Their son was 38 or 39. He was the only one of their 3 kids who was active in the business. He'd been working on the place since returning from college 15 years earlier. He made it a point to pick me up at the airport for the 3-hour drive back to the ranch. Now, during the drive, he told me how hard he'd been working for the last 15 years and how little he'd been paid. He was getting something like $25,000 a year. He said that the ranch also paid for his family's health insurance, but that while his wage was low, he felt he'd built up a lot of sweat equity and was entitled to a bigger slice of the estate pie than his off-farm siblings. If you had a job title, what would it be? I asked. Manager, he said. Although, as we talked, it didn't seem like he had any management responsibilities. He didn't project the stock flow or prepare a budget. He didn't do a grazing chart. He didn't supervise any employees. It seems to me that he was doing the work of a ranch hand. I asked him about the rig he was driving. Is this yours? No, it's a ranch truck, but I get to use it, he said. The ranch pays for gas, insurance, maintenance, and repair? It did. When we got to his house, a beautiful 4-bedroom ranch-style home where I had a great meal and spent a nice night, I asked him if he paid rent. Well, of course he didn't. The housing, utilities, even the groceries were provided by the business. As we talked into the evening, I started adding it up. $25,000 for salary, roughly $12,000 for health insurance. I added in $14,000 for the vehicle. That's the annual cost of owning and operating a vehicle these days. I wrote in $10,000 for rent and utilities, bringing the salary and benefits package to over $60,000. I showed him the math and said something like, that's not bad compensation for a hired hand. Not convinced, he felt he was owed more. Well, how much sweat equity do you feel like you've accumulated? I asked. He thought that with the 2 off-farm siblings that his share should be 50% of the estate, with his brother and sister each getting 25%. Now, the ranch was worth about $10 million. Equal shares would have been $3 1/3 million each. He felt he'd earned another $1 2/3 million. $1 2/3 million in sweat equity. I pointed out that that's a wage, including his current salary, of over $135,000 a year, and a total benefits package of over $170,000. Of course, I haven't charged interest on the deferred wages, but you get the point. He had an inflated idea of the value of his sweat. I suggested we look at it from another angle. How much would you have to pay someone to replace the work that you do? I asked. He said you could probably do it for about $40,000 plus benefits. Well, that's roughly $15,000 more than he was currently getting. $15,000 a year times 15 years is $225,000, not $1 2/3 million. Even if we include compound interest at a reasonable rate, we're still looking at less than $300,000. Either way, it's not $1 2/3 million. He had exaggerated the value of his sweat by a factor of 5. Of course, sweat equity isn't always just about the deferred wage that somebody may be entitled to. Sometimes we use it to compensate someone for foregoing other opportunities and coming back to the ranch to help. But if that's the case, let's make an agreement up front as to the value of the sacrifice someone may be making and how they're going to be compensated for it. Counting on sweat equity sets families up for disagreement and disappointment. Most people have an inflated idea of what their sweat is worth. So let's forget about sweat equity. Let's figure out and document what our time is worth. Figure out what the non-cash perks that go with a job contribute to the compensation package and the interest rate that we need to charge on the amount that we're owed. We can do all that in 15 minutes if we'll just sit down and do it. And that's how you will do it if you're ranching for profit.
Hey, Dave, that
3% interest. Gee whiz. That must have been a couple of years ago.
We've got about 18 minutes, Dave, before we welcome on our next guest.
We're perfect. We're good. All right. Thanks, Jared. We already talked about this. When what you do becomes who you are, it's hard to stop doing. Which leads us to retirement. I discovered this, that retirement doesn't have to be an ending. It can be a beginning. And if I discovered how much fun it was going to be in retirement, I would have figured out a way to do it much earlier. I wanted to hang on to the business another 4 or 5 years. I felt like we built this platform that was just about ready to have explosive growth. But Dallas, the new owner, was ready to step up, and Kathy, my wife, was ready to step back. And so a little begrudgingly, I did it. But man, oh man, I am so glad I did. Within 6 months, I lost 20 pounds without even trying. I don't think as business owners, we recognize the stress that we're under. I don't like holding people accountable. And as much as I loved one of our employees, Robin, sometimes she'd come in a little late and, geez, do I talk to her about it today? Do I let it slide? Just the absence of that, which I wasn't even aware I was feeling stress from that, but not having that stress, it was like every day I could wake up and not even think about it. Anyway, it's retirement. It's good. I just got back from Italy, 2.5 weeks in Italy, messing around, just having a blast and hiking up to ruins of castles and things like that. The senior generation tends to do what I wanted to do, and that's to keep control too long. In business, the conventional thinking is that the senior generation tends to hang on for 4 or 5 years too long. In ranching, I think it's more like 25 years too long, which again is why some ranches skip a generation. But when what you do is who you are, how do you stop doing? I believe that elders are a great asset, but just because you're older doesn't mean you're an elder. I believe that inheritance is a gift, not an entitlement. But I also believe that there's no such thing as a free gift. I've never received a gift without feeling some kind of obligation to say thank you or do something to reciprocate. And if that's true, then the intention there might not have been any strings attached to the gift, but I still felt an obligation, which means there was some cost. I also think it's important to get in touch with our motivations about why are we giving. You see people give to try to influence or control. You see people try to give to make things equal. You see people give to try to liberate or create independence. I think it's important that we get in touch with what is our motivation behind giving a gift. It might change the way we do things. This is not a belief, this is something I'm certain of, that gifting wealth will not make up for time or intimacy withheld. And I think this is a huge mistake that a lot of us make. I remember after my son was born, it was an emergency C-section, and I got to scrub and go in. And it's one of those things where, your wife is there and you're trying to be supportive, but they're also cutting her open. It's like, whoa, look, hang on a second, hon, let me look at this. And they lift my son out, and it was just amazing. I was relating that story to a rancher that I'd been doing some work with while I was still with the university. He's an older gentleman, probably 80, 85. And he took his bony finger and he got in my face and he says, "Don't you ever do what I did." Well, what did you do, Gene? And he said, "I worked so long and so hard to build this place for my kids, and now they want no part of it. and they want no part of me. And he began to cry. Gifting wealth will not make up for time or intimacy withheld. It just doesn't work that way. I also believe that expectations aren't good enough. We need agreements, which means we need to write things down. And everyone is owed honesty and transparency. I've seen the older generation sometimes say, well, the kids are going to be taken, kids, don't worry about it. You're going to be taken care of. Here's your son, 45 years old, and he's been there 10 years working his butt off as a hired hand. The clock is ticking for him. He's less employable. He's becoming less employable every year off the farm, waiting for this implied promise. He's got too much at stake. Taking care of your grandkids. He's got too much at stake for you not to be completely honest and transparent with your children and your grandchildren. Two more, and we already got into these a little bit. The most powerful legacies are not in the form, here, I put it in wrong. You don't get to define your legacy. It's everybody who's left after you're gone who get to define what your legacy was. And I already brought this up. I believe the most powerful legacies are not in the form of physical assets. Which leads me to some homework I'm going to give you. I'm not going to check your homework, but here's some things that I would suggest you do as a result of what we've talked about today. Actually, there's a fourth thing that I'll mention at the end that's not written down. I'd like you to take some time and think about, what is your family legacy? What do you think of as your family's legacy? After you've given that some thought, I'd like you to think about, I should have kept the word family out of that. What is your legacy? Take the word family out of that. What is your legacy? And what if your legacy could not come on, Dave. What if your legacy could not involve a physical asset? If your legacy, I'm not saying it can't, but if it couldn't, what would you want your legacy to be? And what's one thing that you could do to earn that legacy in this next week? What's one thing you could do to earn that legacy that somebody would say, yeah, that's what so-and-so stood for? And then the third thing is, and this was suggested to me, and I can't remember the person who suggested this task, but I think it's a brilliant task. To sit down and write a letter to one of your kids to convey a lesson or idea that most people probably wouldn't mention, but that you think is important to understand. Some value or principle that shaped your life. For me, it might be that the answer is in the team. That, none of us is as smart as all of us. And if we work together, we can accomplish some amazing things. But write a letter to one of your kids to convey that idea. And do that within a week. Do all that. The other piece of homework that I'm going to suggest to you is that you take some time and you think, what are my beliefs about succession and estate planning? And by my beliefs, I don't mean mine, I mean yours. How do I think about these things? Do I owe my kids an inheritance? What is inheritance? Is it a gift, or is it just a balance sheet transfer from one account to another? Do I owe my kids a job? Think through these things and have the discussion with your family about how they all feel about them, because those are going to lead to the actions, and those actions dictate the results. Jared, that's what I had prepared. If there's any questions, or if you want to have a bit of discussion, we got a little bit of time.
Dave, that was wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, just those principles, they're applicable for me and for our business. Those are the things. And just to let you in on a little secret, why do I do these things? Why do I invite these speakers? Maybe because I'm selfish and because they're the things that I need the most. So please, kind of a question, and I'll summarize it. I won't read it verbatim, but one of the questions that came up is it better to take the Band-Aid approach and just rip this off and make changes suddenly, or do we ease into this? I assume it's meaning like coming up with this culture and things. So, kind of a a little bit of the how-to, what you've seen successful, Dave, with businesses that you've consulted with.
Yeah, a couple of comments about that. First of all, I'd like to know more about the context of where the question comes from. By the way, if anybody has any questions or wants to have a conversation with me, I don't take consulting clients. I don't do coaching. I'm retired. I don't want to be obligated to do anything for anybody. That said, if you email me a question, you'll get an answer. It might take a week or two because I do accept speaking engagements and things like that. But I'll get back to you. You can probably tell I like talking about this stuff, and I'll talk about it with you if you want, and I won't charge you a penny, but I won't take you on as a client because I don't take clients. Imagine you're drowning in the middle of the ocean, and here's a boat going by, and they're standing at the railing with a life preserver, and they're about to toss it to you. So you yell back, "Take your time." I don't think that's the way it works. If you're drowning in the ocean, you want change right now. You want change right now. In childbirth, and it's been a long time since my kids were born. My son's 35, my daughter's 33 now. But I'm trying to remember the only part of the delivery process I remember. There's 3 stages of labor, and the only one I remember is the 3rd stage, where the cervix dilates. I think it goes up to 3 or 4 centimeters, and then it's 4 or 5 centimeters to 7 centimeters, and then 7 to 9. And that period when it dilates from 7 to 9 centimeters, that's called transition. And I remember the name of that one because that's the one where your wife grabs you by the shirt collar and says, "You did this to me. You're never going to touch me again." It seemed to me that was where the most angst is, and I think it's appropriately named, because the difficulty is not in being in this new reality, and the difficulty was not being in the old reality. The difficulty is in the transition from one to the other. Transition is perfectly named. It's the change. It's not the change, it's the changing where the pain is. So let's minimize that. I've seen people say, let's draw it out as long as possible. What that means to me is let's draw the pain out as long as possible. No, let's find a way to expedite this. For those of you who have livestock or breeding cattle, when people look at changing the calving season, and you see guys calving in March, and they think, well, you know what, we really ought to be going to mid-May or even June, and you'll see them make the transition 2 weeks at a time. Every year, another 2 weeks. So they're drawing that transition out over a 5 or 6 year period as opposed to just changing it. You can almost guarantee that over that 5 or 6 year period, they're going to lose money, they're going to be uncomfortable, they're going to be stressed, as opposed to just getting it done. Jared, you interpreted that, or at least I got the feeling you interpreted that as to be changing the culture of the business. I have 2 things to say about that. One is changing the culture of an organization is maybe the most difficult change of anything, of any type of thing you want to do. Changing the culture of an organization is as challenging because you have a track record. Your employees, everybody around you, you know, when you say, well, I'm going to change, I'm going to start doing things this way, people will roll their eyes and say, yeah, right, where have we heard that before? And it becomes very difficult to change the culture of an organization. But here's the other thing. I had a young kid, he's probably 35 years old, from somewhere up in Canada. I think it was somewhere in British Columbia, and he had maybe 40 cows, maybe 80 cows, I don't remember. This is probably 15 years ago. And he called me up and he was interested in the school. And we talked about it for a while, and I described it as a business school. It's not our school on ranching, it's a school on business. And he said, well, maybe someday when I get bigger, then it'll be a business. He's looking at it wrong. His place, I don't care what scale he ever gets to, it will never be a business. But we look for the change. What's the first thing you need to do to make this transfer from a collection of assets and a bunch of jobs into a real business? And we look at well, maybe I need to do this, or maybe I need to get that, or maybe we need to have this. It's none of those things. It's all up here, and it's all in here. How do you see this? Is this a place to go to work in, or is it a place to work on? Is this business? What is your relationship to the ranch? And no physical thing has to change. It's an intellectual and an emotional thing that has to change. And once you get that, the change is unstoppable. Once this gets right and this gets right, nothing's going to hold you back. You're on your way. But changing this and this is as difficult to change as you'll make. Anyway, hopefully we got a little bit of a start on that today.
Well, Dave, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. I've been taking notes here. Hopefully you all have as well. I'm a student here as well, and we're in this journey of building a legacy business. Highly encourage you to take Dave up on that offer. And if you need help accessing those principles, we can help with that. Our team can. But Dave, thank you. And just by show of hands here again, remember the little emojis or whatever. Just curious, how many people in this audience have been to the Ranching for Profit School? Go ahead and raise your hands. We just kind of want to see. Again, if you feel inclined, reach out to somebody in the chat whose you see his hand is up. Just privately message them in the chat and say, hey, was it worth it? I can guarantee what the answer is going to be. Yes. And for myself, having gone to the school a couple different times with Dave and others, this is pretty amazing. Over 12 people. Yes, absolutely. Great investment of time. So we're grateful for you, Dave. Thank you so much for being a part of the Regenerative Legacy Summit. Your message was a perfect way to kick it off.